Today on Dreamland, we have an extraordinary guest, Franceen King. Franceen is one of the premier facilitators at the Monroe Institute. She's been at it for 20 years, and the first Gateway at the Monroe Institute she ever facilitated, guess who one of her students was? It was me, Whitley Strieber. I had an incredible time there, and you're going to hear all about it when Franceen and I talk about this Gateway and about these experiences in the subscriber section. I had these after the communion experience and before I had published the book, and I gave a galley of the book to Robert Monroe, and he read it and said, "You're going to have trouble with this." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Little did I know. But first, Linda Moulton Howe is going to be with us with a hot report on very unusual lights in the sky around the country. The possible hoax in Phoenix is just the tip of the iceberg. And at the end of this remarkable presentation, you're going to find out that probably wasn't a hoax at all. So here she is from Albuquerque, earthfiles.com, award-winning master of ceremonies, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Well, I'm going to start with April 18th and the 4:37 a.m. Central Time, when there was a huge earthquake at an epicenter 38 miles northwest of Evansville, Indiana. It was a magnitude 5.2 at about 7 miles deep, and it shook sleeping residents in Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Kansas, and as far as Georgia, nearly 900 miles away. Indianapolis International Airport closed down for an hour while the control tower was evacuated. This was the first strong earthquake in the Midwest since 1968, 40 years ago. Well, northeast of that epicenter in Kokomo, Indiana, 2 days, or actually nights, before the earthquake on April 16th, the 9/11 Emergency Center was flooded with almost 150 phone call reports between 10:25 and 10:40 p.m. The calls were about bright lights in the sky and a loud explosion or boom that violently rattled houses and windows. Authorities were quick to, the next day, come up with it was, quote, a mid-air mistake Wednesday night when at least 2 F-16 jets in routine training exercises with the Indiana Air National Guard went too fast at 10,000 feet and caused a sonic boom on the ground, unquote. But the Mutual UFO Network received a series of alleged UFO sightings on that night of April 16th from Kokomo residents specifically, and here is one example. Quote, at approximately 10:30 p.m. on the night of April 16, I was in the living room watching TV and my husband had gone to bed. There was a huge boom that rattled the front window. My husband asked, "What is that noise?" And I went to the front door to see. Off to the west, there appeared a large object with lights all the way across it. It reminded me of a hair barrette with lights. It seemed to be hovering, yet the lights appeared to turn around it. My husband came out to stand behind me just in time to see the lights reappear from right to left until 5 lights were showing. Then this did this for a second time before it disappeared. The lights that we saw with our naked eye were yellowish orange in color. If you click on wwki.com, there is an article about this boom and the bright lights. You will see pictures that someone submitted. The 4th picture down is exactly what I saw when I first looked outside, unquote. And in my Earth Files report about this news, you can see that photograph and others taken in Kokomo that night of April 16th that look like colored beads in a complex pattern very similar to Stephenville, Texas in January. Now, continuing a bit more with her email to MUFON, quote, this was no meteor or F-16. They don't hover. We could not take our eyes off of this, and my husband, who is a Vietnam veteran and a retired deputy sheriff, said he had never seen anything like it. We are both certain that what we saw was unidentifiable, unquote. Well, the next day, WWKI Radio in Kokomo, Indiana, posted the following images on its website under the headline, quote, "Big Boom, Lights in the Sky," unquote, and below the headline, it put 5 photographs courtesy of Dustin Cronkite, taken between 10 and 11 p.m. on April 16, 2008. The radio website asked listeners to, quote, "Take a look at these pictures. After you do, take the poll and let us know what you think they are," unquote. At Earth Files, I have cropped the photos of multiple colored, shape-changing aerial objects, highly strange, very much like Texas, to give the largest images without too much pixel distortion. The intensity of the colorful patterns are not as bright as the Texas video and photos, but you can see a comparison of all of these photos and videotapes that I'm discussing in this Dreamland report at my news website, earthfiles.com, in the report entitled Strange Aerial Lights Like Texas, but now photographed in Indiana, Illinois, and Massachusetts. Well, that big booming noise and earthquake hit 2 days later in the early morning of Friday, April 18th. And that afternoon, I received an email from a professional photographer in Massachusetts. Courtney Lynn Wilson Merrill lives in Holyoke. She and her husband have been good friends and have good friends in Granville, about 20 minutes southwest. Courtney was alerting me to the fact that her Granville friends were seeing very strange and colorful lights flashing in the sky that week. And then, the very night that she had emailed in the afternoon on Friday night, April 18th, around 10 p.m., Courtney got a call from Dan Vierno in Granville who said there were 2 more bright lights with spinning colors above trees near his house.
Immediately, I grabbed my camera, I grabbed my tripod, I grabbed my husband, and I was out the door, and I drove right over there. I jumped out of the car. My husband was actually trying to park, and Dan just immediately grabbed me by my shoulders, handed me binoculars, and pointed into the sky. And there was this big, bright ball of white light just above the tree line, and it was flashing with colors. And when you looked at it through your binoculars, the object looked circular, and it had the lights inside of it moving. It was mainly a bright white light with the colors on the inside circling around. And then there was a second object over to the right of that first object, the one that I was videotaping. And that one was mainly orange with the same colored lights dancing in the middle.
So one was more silvery white and one was orange, but both had that merry-go-round look of colored lights swirling around inside.
Yes, you could clearly see colored lights swirling around it. It was like blue and green and red and pink and gold. It reminded me of those flashing lights that they sell at Disney World for the parade.
Really vivid colors.
Yes, yes. It was beautiful. It was like a bright pink and green and blue and gold. And it was just hovering above tree line. And it looked like it was maybe sort of slowly moving downward, just ever so slightly.
Okay, and for 90 minutes, from your point of view as an eyewitness and a photographer, this silvery white light with the colored lights moving around inside of it like a merry-go-round, and the orange amber light with colored lights moving around inside of it, were they really unique compared to other astronomical things you've ever seen?
Yeah, it was completely different than the stars because we were comparing the stars. We were looking through the binoculars, and we were looking at the stars, and then we'd go back to the object. The object was a lot brighter, a lot bigger, and it had the colors, swirling carousel of colors on the inside. So it was just this big, colorful ball of light hovering above the tree. And the first object was moving down, and the other one, the amber-colored one, wasn't moving at all. It was just staying there. In comparison to some of the star formations above, we could see them, just since we were out there for so long, tilt downward towards the horizon. But the other object, it wouldn't move with the constellations. It just stayed there.
I told Courtney that Erath County Constable Leroy Gayton in Dublin, Texas, described one unidentified aerial object that he saw and videotaped on February 2nd, 2008. This was his description, quote, a spinning sun or Jupiter planet like gaseous throwing off colored strobe lights, unquote. Other Texas eyewitnesses said that it was like looking at a merry-go-round covered with silver white Christmas tree lights turning inside a hazy gaseous surface that kept changing colors. Well, another of Courtney's Granville friends and eyewitness to these strange flashing lights in Massachusetts is Richard Guzman, 39 years old, with a background as a computer salesman, and now he is a detail mechanic for van servicing in Granville. His house is about 5 minutes up the road from Dan Vierno's and is more isolated in the Granville Mountains. An odd, colorful, flashing light first caught his attention from his bedroom window on April 15th, and Rich could not figure out what that light was that night and was even more surprised when his friend Dan Vierno called him on Thursday night, April 17th, and told Rich to go outside to see at least 5 bright flashing
lights. The 17th, I had a phone call from my friend Dan, and Dan said, Rich, you got to look up the sky. I think there's something up there, and I don't know what it is, but I think there are definitely UFOs up there. And I'm like, UFO? What are you talking about? So I'm looking up to the sky, and I'm looking, and I'm seeing these flashing lights, and I grab my binoculars, and I look up, and he's on the phone with me at the same time, you know? Mm-hmm. He's like, what do you see? And I'm like, there's like these flashing silver lights, and they go from silver, and then they went to red, and then they went to blue.
How many do you think were in the sky at the same time doing these odd color flashes?
For me, what I witnessed, I'm going to say at least over 5.
And were they in any kind of a pattern themselves in relationship to each other?
I saw one of them that looked kind of like a long triangle, like there was like one that was pointed west, one was pointed north, and one was pointed south. It was weird because the triangle was long, not facing downward, but sideways.
3 of these pulsing lights forming themselves into a formation of a long triangle.
Yeah, exactly. The one that I saw really vivid, it was moving and doing this little jagged movement. It's like moving a little bit and then staying in the spot. Moving a little bit and then staying in the same spot. I don't know, I never seen anything like it in my life.
If you've got one long triangle formation of 3 of them, what were the other pulsing lights? What kind of pattern were they in?
In the triangle formation, they didn't really move. There was one that I saw separate that was like bigger and vibrant. That's the one I saw just move a little bit and then stay still and then move a little bit and then stay still. And then I could see like silver, like it was just like a silver whitish color. You know, it's weird, hard to describe it. But I do recall when Dan was talking to me, he's like, Rich, I saw blue lights and red lights, and I think he said green too, but I saw red and blue lights. For me, I think they're still out there. You know what I mean? That's what I'm thinking. I told Dan that, and he came up here yesterday, and they were still up there, but they were moving towards the west.
You mean that you all saw this Saturday night, April 19th as well?
Yeah, they were more towards the west. And I'm seeing one right now. I'm outside right now, and I'm seeing it. Let me focus my binoculars. Yeah, there it is. I'll be a son of a gun. It's mostly silver right now. It's flashing lights. It looks like it's like Christmas lights, and it's not. It looks like little crystal silver lights, almost like a yellowish tint, and it's flashing.
It's silver now?
Yeah, it's silver now.
So this is exactly what you all saw on the 17th?
And there it is. Looks green. Yeah, it's flashing. What is that?
So it has changed from silver to green.
Yeah.
No movement of the object itself?
No, it's not moving. It's staying still.
Do you have any way to photograph it?
No, I don't. Wish I did. I just saw red flashing lights, and now it's back to silver.
Do you know anybody you could call and say, can you get a camera with a lens on this and take some photographs?
Well, it's kind of hard for me. I'm up in the mountains, so there's not really many neighbors. There might be another one there, but it's hard to tell because it's cloudy.
2 of them are sort of below the cloud ceiling?
And I think I just found a third one.
So they have to be under the cloud cover.
Yep, there's the other one. There's 3 of them now.
Okay. And they all are doing the same thing?
Yep, it's mostly silver and then flashing red and then flashing bluish green. Like, that is so bizarre.
All of you are convinced that you're watching something that is not astronomical or military?
No, this is like flashing color lights, and no way. And this is the strangest thing I've ever seen since I was born on this planet. I'll tell you that much. I've never, ever seen anything like this at all.
Another April 18th email that I received at earthfiles.com was from Brandon Johnson about a very unusual digital photograph that his 9-year-old niece, Gabrielle Johnson, had taken on Saturday, April 5th, 2008, from her yard in Oswego, Illinois. He included Gabby's email with her best photograph, and I was impressed that the image was very similar to Kokomo, Indiana, and Stephenville, Texas. I was able to call Gabrielle's mom, Leah Johnson, and arrange to interview Gabby by phone about her photograph. Gabrielle's favorite subject is astronomy, and she likes to look at the night sky. It was about 11:45 p.m. that Saturday night of April 5th when she and a neighborhood friend were outside stargazing at her Oswego, Illinois home.
And we were outside on my trampoline, and we were looking at the sky. We were looking at all the stars and the planes, and then we noticed something else. And we didn't know what it was, so we went inside and got the telescope. It really didn't help much, so we thought maybe we could get like a camera or something and like zoom in with it to see what it was. So we started taking pictures of it, and when we looked at the picture, it was like blue, green, red, and purple, and it was like very colorful, and it looked like it was moving.
Almost as if you saw a sequence of colors moving rapidly that somehow were then photographed looking, would you say, like colored beads that were strung on a string?
Yes.
Now, can you go back and tell me what exactly caught your attention in the beginning?
Well, when we were on the trampoline, what really caught my eye was when we were looking up, and it was like the brightest thing in the sky. It was like white, but like around it was kind of like bluish and greenish and red and purple.
Did you see any motion in it?
Yes, just a little bit though. It was kind of like back and forth and kind of like up and down a little bit.
So it was definitely not like a star or a planet.
No, it was very strange. It was just this big white color, kind of like shiny thing in the sky, and it had blue, green, red, and purple all around it. They were kind of flashing in that order, so it was in blue, green, red, and purple, and that's really what we saw.
You decide to go get your camera. How do you attach your camera?
We were holding it as still as possible, and we were right next to a tree, so we was kind of like leaning on it a little bit, so we weren't moving, and we were holding it as like steady as possible so we could take the picture.
Against the lens piece?
Yes. We don't know like really exactly what we think it is yet, but it's very strange. After we took the pictures, we went inside to show everyone, and we tried to look it up on the computer. We didn't find anything. We looked in my astronomy books and didn't find anything similar. And then we went back outside, and it was gone.
And Whitley, when you compare Gabrielle's image that she took through her telescope with her camera to the very strange, similar, like colored beads in various patterns in Kokomo, Indiana, to nights when there was this huge boom, and this is before the earthquake 2 days later. Whether there is any connection or not, I have no idea, but the local media in Kokomo has been asking that question in a series of articles about what happened in the 16th, anticipating the big earthquake on the 18th. And then you go to Granville, Massachusetts, all of this taking place in approximately the same time period, and you have the same spinning lights almost behind Gaz that was described in Texas. And in Texas, you also have the extraordinary videotape taken by David Carone and by the constable's wife, Wendy Gayton, of the same, they look like colored beads strung in very complicated three-dimensional patterns. And so I am saying to Earth Files and Dreamland listeners, anybody, anywhere, who is out and sees any of these strange, very large, they're much larger looking than the stars in the sky, and you can get any kind of videotape or photographs, please try, and then let Whitley and let me know at Unknown Country and at earthfiles.com. Now, this is like one major track, Whitley, and now I'm going to move briefly to the Phoenix Lights. They are not in the category of what I've just described and we've heard from these eyewitnesses. They were red, and they moved, according to Brad Drenning a man who took the best videotape in Phoenix. It lasted for 14 minutes, and I have the links at my earthfiles.com Phoenix Lights report so you can see everything that he videotaped. And what is impressive is that in what is called videotape 2, because they had to divide the videotape, it was so large in megabytes, they had to divide it into 3 parts. In the beginning of videotape 2, it has been running, and you see what looks like a very perfect Y in the sky of these 4 lights. And the one light forming that V starts moving without hesitation, without any erratic behavior, and moves right up and stops at a point in which the pattern changes smoothly and rapidly from the Y to what looks like a kite pattern. And when you look at the rest of all the videotape, you get the impression, as Brad Drenning and his family said, that these look like 4 lights changing formation approximately every 2 minutes on his videotape. And that was on the night of Monday, April 21st, between 8 and 8:30 p.m. Phoenix time. Within 2 days, by the 23rd, the ABC 15 television news station, which had contacted everybody, Luke Air Force Base, the airport, all kinds of authorities, the police, and they all said, we don't know what these red lights are. Then ABC 15 gets a tip to go out to a man who says that he watched his neighbor take 4 road flares that look like sticks of dynamite and light them attached by string to 2 black and 2 white helium balloons and launch them from this neighbor's house. And there are a whole series of questions that I have about why the ABC 15 reporter, who has his cameraman go over to the wall, they focus on a trellis at the back of the house while the neighbor is saying, that's where I saw the balloons launched. Why didn't the ABC TV reporter walk over there with the cameraman, knock on that door, and say, we'd like to talk to you about why you launched these flares? So far, the man has remained anonymous, and nobody has been able to ask the alleged perpetrator that question. Now, 2 other important issues. On the morning of the 23rd, the day that this alleged perpetrator was basically found out by the neighbor, on that morning, the Charles Gross radio show in Phoenix had a military pilot on an interview for about 2 minutes, and the military pilot was saying that he watched those lights during most of that half hour on Monday night, the 21st, talked about his military background and what he had flown. And he said on the air, those were not flares attached to helium balloons. And apparently that rumor was already in Phoenix by the morning of the 23rd. And then ABC 15 News unfolded the story with their interview throughout that day into the evening. Well, on top of that confusion and the contradiction of a military pilot saying it was not flares on helium balloons, the Phoenix New Times newspaper added further confusion in its April 22nd headline, quote, air traffic controllers who saw UFO muzzled by FAA, unquote. And the report begins, quote, air traffic controllers in the main tower of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport saw Monday night's bizarre spectacle of red lights flying across North Valley skies, but the Federal Aviation Administration won't let them talk to the media, unquote. The traffic controllers said they did not know what the red lights were and that nothing showed up on radar. Now the Phoenix New Times has filed a formal request with the FAA for radar records of any unidentified aircraft in the area between 8 and 8:30 p.m. on Monday, April 21st, 2008. And Whitley, as impressive as the ABC 15 interview is with the alleged neighbor eyewitness of the still anonymous perpetrator, all of the questions that I've raised boil down to another question in my own mind. Could all of this have occurred because somebody in authority wants to make sure that the waters are muddied by a confusing story like this before something else occurs that somebody may know is coming down in the context of all these other major strange lights in Texas, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, and who knows where else they will show up.
Well, exactly, Linda. And there is somebody frantically trying to do whatever they can to muddy these waters, or what seems to me increasingly unlikely is that the Phoenix lights, the new Phoenix lights, were indeed a hoax. The problem is this, and it's a very significant one. A helium balloon, it's a fragile thing. It has only a very limited amount of lift, and the road flares that they allegedly used were, first of all, they're fairly heavy but very hot. They could have, I guess, put up enough balloons, but then why was the formation so smooth? So my question then, I say this, okay, guys, if you did this, do it again. Absolutely. So we can all see. And you know what will happen? Nothing. No one is ever going to do it again because no one did it in the first place.
I agree with you completely. When you watch Brad Drenning's 14 minutes of videotape, which I believe you have watched also.
Yes.
And you see that very specific movement. Jim Mars looked at it today and he said, I don't know how flare attached to a helium balloon would make that kind of a direct course and stop and stay in formation and then move 2 minutes later.
Okay, Linda, thank you very much. We have come to the end of our time together. Next up, William Henry and Franceen King are going to be talking about the Monroe Institute and out-of-the-body travel. Franceen King is a remarkable person, and I know this because she facilitated her first Monroe Institute Gateway back 20 years ago, and one of her first students was, guess who? Whitley Strieber. And for our subscribers today, Franceen and I are going to talk about that Gateway experience and some of the remarkable experiences she's had in a lifetime of flying freely out of her body. We'll be right back. Subscribers' tickets to the Dreamland Festival are going faster than we expected. We don't have all that many seats, so please, if you're interested, do sign up soon. Use the coupon code DF1 as you check out of the unknowncountry.com store to get $25 off each of your tickets.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Welcome, everyone. Each of us has within us the ability to become self-actualized beings. For one reason or another, we sometimes experience worry, fear, stress, anxiety, and doubt about fulfilling our potential. The really crippling choice is that of disbelief. We don't believe we can achieve enlightenment or fulfill our potential, therefore, we don't. But imagine a place you can visit where after your first visit you become free of the fears that hold us back. A place where there is more than just happy talk going on and where proven techniques are utilized. The Monroe Institute in Virginia is such a place. Founded by Robert Monroe in 1974, TMI is devoted to the premise that focused consciousness contains definitive solutions to the major issues of human experience. The Monroe Institute is world-renowned for its pioneering sound technology called Hemi Sync, used to alter consciousness, expand awareness, focus attention, and facilitate greater health, well-being, and self-awareness. The Monroe Institute's website is monroeinstitute.com. Since 1996, today's guest, Dr. Franceen King, has conducted the residential programs at the Monroe Institute. She is the director of the Self-Awareness Institute as well. Dr. King has been in private practice in the Tampa Bay area since 1981. She's licensed as a mental health counselor with advanced training in hypnosis and sex therapy. She's here today to talk about her work at Monroe and the unsuspected abilities within us, and even the way in which my Stargate 2012 presentation is being used in the latest programs at Monroe. Franceen, welcome to Dreamland.
Well, thank you, William. Wow, what a nice introduction.
Well, you deserve it. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
We've met a couple of times, and you've been kind enough to keep up with the work that I'm doing, and I'm certainly excited about what you're doing with Stargate 2012 and want to talk with you about that later. But the thing I wanted to start talking about first, Franceen, is that every time I bring up the Monroe Institute with people, which is attended by thousands of people each year, I'm just invariably impressed by the caliber of the people that I find are students at Monroe.
Yes, that's something that has impressed me for the 23 years I've been there. Week after week, we attract people from all over the world, and they tend to be people who are intelligent, well-actualized personalities from many, many fields. But regardless of what field they're in, they're people who are expressing themselves and making a difference.
And what I've found is that many of the people I've met are very influential business people who have gone to Monroe because they want to step out on kind of the spiritual wild side, if you will, but they want to feel the comfort of mainstream. And that's what so impresses me, I think, about Monroe is that there is this incredible power pack in there that drives it. And I think if we have to start talking about the founder of the Monroe Institute, Robert Monroe. Briefly tell us the story of how Robert Monroe came onto the scene and founded the Monroe Institute.
Okay. Well, Bob, as you may know or may not know, was a broadcast executive for many years, living in New York. He used to write radio shows, and in about 1958, he suddenly began having these spontaneous out-of-body experiences. And he had never heard of this kind of experience, and initially he was very frightened, very much concerned that he might have some neurological illness. But after checking with a number of physicians and psychiatrists, etc., everyone said he seemed perfectly healthy. And these experiences continued, and he noticed that they hadn't killed him. So he became more curious about what was causing them and what the potential might be, how he might use these states. Well, having been in broadcast, sound was a natural connection for him. In fact, for a couple of years before these started, he had been playing around with sound as a way to induce sleep learning. I don't know if you remember, but back in 1956 when Sputnik went up.
Right.
Okay, so he became interested in accelerated learning, and in later years he thought that probably that was something that had contributed to him starting to have these experiences. So he started using sound in various ways to see if it might be possible to enable other people to have these same kinds of out-of-body experiences that he was experiencing.
And so how would you then define the term out-of-body? Let's just kind of define that term. What is an out-of-body experience or astral projection as it's known in the literature?
Right. Well, Bob's first book didn't come out until 1971, and it was called Journeys Out of the Body. And in that, he talked specifically about a kind of experience he was having, which he called his second body experiences, okay? And for him, in the second body, he would find himself separate from his physical body in a form which very much resembled his physical body and was very sensitive. The only difference is it was stretchier, not as firm, okay? And his initial explorations were moving around the physical world in this kind of form and trying to see if he could, friends could see him perhaps or feel him if he touched them, those kinds of experiences. And you're right, that second body state is very much what traditionally has been called the astral body. But Bob Monroe, being a Westerner, did not like words that sounded mysterious or foreign. So to a great extent over the years, he created his own vocabulary for things that do have words in other systems.
And so he, as a result of his incredible interest in this, he not only wanted to explore the out-of-body experience, but he also wanted to help others not only to understand it, but to actually experience it.
Yes, exactly. But just to follow up a bit on your last question, though, as Bob had more experience in this second body state, he noticed that he actually could kind of leave that body or roll out of that body into an even finer, less dense form. And over the years, he discovered that there were really many, many ways to perceive beyond the limits of the physical body. And
what are some of those ways?
Well, he began to talk, in I would say the last 10 years of his life, more about the idea of a phased relationship between consciousness and physicalness.
Mm-hmm.
So on one end of that, a person could have their attention and awareness totally focused in the physical world, in their physical body, and really be here now. But they could start daydreaming about something somewhere else or some other facet of their life, and that would shift them slightly out of phase with the physical. Okay? And he began to see a whole continuum of possible relationships from things that we all experience normally every day, like mild inattention or daydreaming or getting involved in a video game or TV or a book, to things that included, deep meditation, hypnosis, the kind of state one might be in during remote viewing, or sleep dreaming, or sleep, all the way through things like near-death experiences, coma, and then ultimately physical death with attention focused totally elsewhere.
You bring up remote viewing, Francine. Skip Atwater is now the president of the Monroe Institute, and in his works he talks about the early days of his research in the project codenamed Stargate and how it was influenced by Robert Monroe. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Okay. Yes, Skip is currently president of the board of directors. He was our director of research since 1987 after he retired from the Army. But in his Army days, he was the person who first proposed that the Army consider investigating some kind of remote viewing technique to gain intelligence information, because he had read that the Russians and others were attempting to do this. So for 7 years, Skip was actually the technical director of that project and responsible for the overall training of the remote viewers in the Army Intelligence Project.
And were they using Bob Monroe's sound technology, the Hemi Sync technology, in that project?
Yes. Skip had met Bob Monroe several years earlier out of his own, or he had become aware of Bob from his own curiosity and had gone out to meet Bob Monroe and had quite an experience with him and the Hemi Sync technology. Hemi Sync is the technology we use, and I'll describe that a bit in a few moments.
Yeah, go ahead and describe it for us now, because it's so important. It's a breakthrough of Bob Monroe's that has just really launched a consciousness revolution in a way. So tell us a little bit about how that works.
Okay, well, Hemi Sync is a patented audio guidance system. It uses binaural beats. This means that we would put one sound in one ear and then a sound of a slightly different frequency in the other ear, and notice that the brain produces a signal which is the difference of those two signals. So if we use 100 hertz in one ear and 104 in the other ear, both hemispheres of the brain would produce a signal at 4 hertz. The reason this is important is that while Bob discovered that the brain responds to sound stimulation in general, much like if you're listening to music, you start snapping your fingers.
Right.
The brainwave frequencies are below the threshold of human hearing. They're in the, pretty much they start at very low frequencies, from 0 or 0.5 hertz, and that the states that seem to be the frequencies that seem to be associated with expanded awareness are generally low-frequency states, which cannot be heard. So he needed to use something that would allow the brain to respond to sound that it could not hear. That's why he decided to use the binaural beat system.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. And the binaural beats were not created by Bob Monroe. They had been discovered years earlier, but he just used that technology.
And he found it as a way to induce the out-of-body experience and also to open up vast regions of untapped consciousness. Francine, we have to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to talk a little bit about the Gateway Voyage program, which was one of the first programs, and what it's all about and where it eventually took the Monroe Institute. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Franceen King. So, Francine, Bob Monroe publishes his book, which sold millions of copies, Journeys Out of the Body, It was published in 1971, and we're getting things rolling. And he's starting to introduce this idea of the out-of-body experience as something that anybody can experience. And I guess the next step then is the development of the Gateway Voyage program. Talk about that program and how it evolved.
Okay. Well, Bob was still working in a number of other business endeavors after his book came out. And, in fact, he tried to keep his business life and his book very separate from each other. But gradually, the book gained popularity, and in 1974, someone from Esalen Institute invited him to come out and share what he had been learning.
Now, Esalen, that's one of the premier consciousness gathering places on the West Coast, right? In
California.
California, yeah.
Uh-huh. So he put together a few things that he wanted to share. He had developed the Hemi Sync or technology at that point, although I don't think he was actually calling it Hemi Sync at that point. But he and some friends went out there, and at that point, Bob thought it would be best to work around the clock. So the participants were literally listening to exercises 24 hours a day.
Wow.
And it was exhausting for everyone. But that was the beginning of the Gateway Voyage. And then from 74 to 79, Bob had several other hotels there in Virginia and in a few other retreat settings around the country where he would occasionally offer a program and kept refining it. And then in 1979, he opened the residential center, which still exists, southwest of Charlottesville, Virginia, and started offering the Gateway Voyage on a regular basis.
Something that really fascinates me about Robert Monroe's story is his connection with the ETs, and not only just through Project Stargate with the remote viewing, but also in perhaps a direct connection between the Monroe technology and ETs. Let's talk about that connection for a moment, because I know you've also had ET experience yourself going back as far as 1972.
Yes. Well, Bob Monroe always, in his books, he would talk about his memories of his home planet, which he would call KT-95. His memories of existing as an energy curl, that was his word.
Energy curl, interesting.
Curl, and zipping through the universe, playing various games, and how he got attracted, how he got attracted to Earth out of his own curiosity. Okay, and once he came into this Earth experience, how he found that leaving again was a little harder than he had anticipated. Okay.
Gotcha.
But he always felt that he would talk about Earth School, and he always felt that people came to Earth School because somewhere in their travels they had met an Earth School graduate, and the kinds of skills and abilities and insights learned here are valued throughout the universe in every dimension, and so he always had great appreciation for this experience.
Something I find remarkable about his work is the way it so perfectly dovetails or corresponds with the ancient Gnostic teaching, which was essentially the earliest Christian teaching, which says basically the human body is considered an energy vessel. It's like a battery. We have energy stored in our fat cells. It's emitted from our heart in the form of emotional energy. And we're all essentially constantly broadcasting or receiving energy. And I know in his book, Journeys Out of the Body, Bob talks about this concept in really remarkable ways, and he describes another term for this life force or emotional spiritual energy. He calls it loosh. And he talks about beings that harvest loosh from the human body. Can you talk about that concept for a moment? Did you have personal conversations with Bob about it, or what are your thoughts on this idea of the body as an energy vessel and beings harvesting this spiritual energy or loosh from the human body?
Well, basically, he talks about loosh as being a coloration, you might say, of the prime energy. And it is essentially an emotional energy, loosh is. And we often talk about emotion as emotion, energy in motion.
Sure.
And if you look even here upon the earth, how we interact with each other and our various institutions and media and what all, we rely heavily on emotion to move energy and emotion to produce more energy. So that here as physical humans, we are constantly harvesting or tapping into or sharing this loosh with each other. And I think what Bob was talking about is in the non-physical realms, especially in some of the lower realms, there are many who are seeking this as well.
Yeah, in fact, the Gnostics identified the beings who seek to harvest this energy as archons. Jesus and Mary Magdalene talked about them in various Gnostic Gospels and say that the archons are essentially toll collectors. They seek to take our souls by theft, and they are here to harvest this energy for them. But what Jesus and Mary Magdalene were working on is how to travel through the astral realms. And when you read these stories, it becomes incredible, Franceen, because it's almost as if Mary Magdalene is running a research program, and Jesus is her daredevil test pilot, and he goes out into the astral realms and evades these archons, goes into the higher realms, and comes back and provides for her direct knowledge and experience about, or essentially a map about how to get into the higher realms of experience. That's what you do at the Monroe Institute.
Right. I would say very much we do. Now, you have to remember also, though, that Bob was saying that our goal should be to be able to generate what he calls super loosh.
Super loosh. Wow.
Super loosh, which really we could translate that as super love.
Okay.
And energy that radiates not only here in the physical, but well beyond. Mm-hmm. And it's an energy that we can, to a degree, create and sustain, but once you there's a certain point at which it just simply is a part of your being.
Well, it's like with the masters. That's what they describe about them. Everything the master touches, every chair they sit on, every book they pick up, every environment they are in is saturated with this higher energy. You can call it super loosh, super love, whatever you want to call it, but that's what you're talking about.
Right.
And Bob believed that was achievable for us.
Yes, absolutely. And in the Monroe Institute system, we use Hemi Sync and other mental tools, mental exercises to shift consciousness into various states, which we call focus states. Mm-hmm. Okay? And once you get up to about focus 27, I would say, that starts to be the idea of super loosh, or that kind of state, starts to be quite reasonable and achievable.
I have to say something here. Very often when I talk about some of these higher states of awareness and consciousness, inevitably I'll get an email from somebody that's saying, this sounds like Scientology. You're just talking about what Scientology talks about. How did Bob Monroe and the Monroe Institute evade that rap? I have a sense of how they did it, but what are your thoughts? Do people give you that kind of rebuttal from time to time?
I have to say I've never heard anyone say that.
That's great.
I have had some participants over the years who were advanced Scientologists. Mm-hmm. We have people come from virtually every religious background. I have Catholic priests come, I have Buddhist monks come, people who have been exposed to every metaphysical discipline imaginable, as well as even, very traditional evangelical Christians occasionally. Mm-hmm. So
I think the reason you don't get that is because of the intention behind the Monroe Institute. The intention is to awaken and enlighten, not to in any way control.
Right. I think that's certainly part of our intention. We try to use a very neutral language, as I mentioned, a neutral Western language, and we encourage. It's a very non-dogmatic system. Bob would say the only dogma here is that we encourage you to at least entertain the possibility that you are more than your physical body.
And on that, Franceen, the Egyptians claimed that we had as many as 360 senses. Do you think that we're really talking about, when you're talking about these focus states and focused awareness, are we talking about hidden senses within us?
Well, the focus states themselves are not necessarily senses, but as one expands in awareness, many new ways of perceiving open. And that in our system, starting with what we call Focus 12, there are many new ways of perceiving, beyond what we think of as seeing, hearing, tasting. And often people will begin to perceive energetically. And sometimes they'll begin to perceive and receive what we call rotes or thought balls, huge gestalts of information.
Like a download. Some people call them downloads.
Right. Only a rote I consider to be more like a download you get in a zip package. You know, it may take you a few days or even a few years to really unravel it, but you know that you got it.
Right.
The totality.
And that's how Bob talks about receiving this about the Luge. It was one of the rotes that he received from one of his experiences.
Yes. And rote stands for Resonant Organized Thought Energy.
Okay.
Okay.
Francine, we've got to take another quick break. When we come back, I'd like to take a little tour, if you wouldn't mind, if you'll take us through the stair steps through some of the programs offered at the Monroe Institute.
Okay, I'd be happy to.
Great. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Franceen King. Francine, people want to know. They're always asking me, how do I become an agent for change? How can I make a difference?
Okay. Do you want me to answer that?
I'd love for you to answer that, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think people become an agent for change by starting with themselves, first of all, and coming to know more who they are and being who they are and expressing themselves in the world. You know, one of the things that our scientists have found in recent years is that states of consciousness really are contagious. So if you can take care of yourself first, that has an effect on everyone else. And then beyond that, you may get a creative inspiration about something in particular for you to be doing in the world.
Yeah.
One of our programs, Exploration 27, we spend a lot of the week in states that would typically be called afterlife states, with Focus 27 being a state that is very much like how most people conceive of heaven.
So this would be an out-of-body experience, then, that you actually guide them through?
Yes, only they don't necessarily have to be experiencing it in a second body or astral body state. They can be experiencing it in other ways as well. But one of the things we notice there is there are many different functions and processes, and one is a huge, huge planning function. And some of that planning function seems to relate to individual lifetimes and coming in and expressing in individual lifetimes. And some of that planning function seems to relate to larger, more collective plans related to humanity and the planet.
So this is trying to help people to understand what their individual mission is, as well as what the mission of the group of people they're incarnate with is?
Right. So that people often get wonderful inspirations from that energy. You know, whether it's scientific inventions or books or social movements or specific roles to play. Usually from that perspective, there are individual aspects, but also some collective aspects.
And like how many people would typically be in an introductory class like that?
Well, that's not an introductory class, but for all of our classes, whether it's Gateway or the graduate programs, our center accommodates 24 participants.
Okay.
Okay? And we're usually full. And then we have a second center, Roberts Mountain Retreat, up there on the property, which is actually Bob's old home converted and expanded. And I think we can take 18 participants there. So some weeks we actually run two programs simultaneously.
There must be an awful lot of synchronicity that goes on then when those people kind of come together for this experience?
Yes, absolutely. Participants are often just truly amazed because they're coming from so many places, and yet they meet people who have some common interests and experiences. In any given group, there are usually a couple of key themes with the particular group that shows up that week. But many participants will say that one of the most powerful parts of the whole experience was the opportunity to really share themselves at a level of honesty with others who have such similar interests.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've perceived with the people that I know that have gone to Monroe, is that it was an opportunity for them to really dig deep and also to ultimately kind of take off a mask that they've been wearing for very often most of their life, and to actually just kind of be themselves.
Yes, I think that's very true.
Talk about the importance then of expanding the heart energy in the Monroe programs.
Well, it's something that we consider important. It is something that happens naturally as people begin to let more energy flow. There is a natural release of various barriers, emotional barriers, beliefs, memories, whatever. We do have one program that is geared specifically toward addressing heart issues and opening the heart. And we do have one take-home, one product that the public can purchase called Opening the Heart, which is a series of exercises. But it is something that happens naturally, I think, as people allow themselves to experience a greater flow of energy and begin to identify more with their energy body, which was a point you were making earlier. So we do consider that important.
Now, is sound is the primary way that you kind of open the heart energy in this way, or is it more guided meditations? Talk about.
I think that it is both. Mm-hmm. And regardless of our technology, I always tell participants when they show up, I say, I know that your greater self, the greater being that you are, has a purpose for you being here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly what that is, okay? But I absolutely trust that your greater self is going to use this opportunity for whatever way best serves your further development and unfoldment in this moment. And what we do with Hemi Sync and our exercises, we create an environment, basically, which makes all of that really, really safe and easy.
And so you become essentially the guide. You must connect with the higher selves of these people then as the facilitator then, huh?
I would say very much so. And in our advanced programs where we do a more cosmic journeying, we actually do it as a group so that the trainers, we usually have 2 trainers or facilitators per group, and we'll actually journey with them. And one of the things that's always exciting for participants is how aware they can be of each other in these states, too. But in these higher states, the group energy is really important, both for sustaining everyone and letting it be easier, and I think personally for just demonstrating a willingness to be part of group.
And then what about past lives? I mean, do those come into play here? I mean, we've talked about kind of the soul group thing where the person is getting back into touch with their original mission as well as the mission perhaps of the group they may have incarnated with. But do you deal much with past lives in these experiences?
We do, because the memories come up quite naturally and spontaneously all the time. Bob Monroe was never particularly interested in past lives until the late 1980s. And what he realized was that he was having contact with beings or personalities that were no longer in physical embodiment, but seemed to be stuck in some kind of a limited energy pattern. And he would start trying to assist them, get their attention, and move them to a state of greater clarity and joy and choice, which he called the park, which is also how we designate our Focus 27 state.
The park.
The park. And Bob started doing what he called rescue and retrieval, okay? And our whole Lifeline program is kind of built around this idea of rescue and retrieval work, making contact with those who have passed over but who might be in some kind of a limiting energy pattern for whatever reason, emotions or beliefs, limiting beliefs or whatever, and helping them move to a state of greater clarity. Well, Bob began to realize that some of these people he was helping were actually himself from other lifetimes.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay? And that was a real revelation for him.
Wow.
Yeah, and so he began to see how the idea of becoming aware of other lifetimes was more important, so that as we move ourselves into states of greater wholeness, we're bringing along all of the parts of ourselves or aspects of ourselves that may have expressed in times in the past or the future.
Wow.
Because we're really outside of linear time at that point.
I've had hypnosis training in the past. I've done hundreds of past life regressions, and the idea of the parts is something that is still to this day. It's been years since I've done it, but something I still think about because it was so powerful. And when we get back from the break, Franceen, I'd like to talk with you just a little bit more about these parts and how they interact and the role that they play in our lives.
Okay.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Franceen King. Franceen, just before the break, we were talking about the subject of parts, and I'm so glad you brought that up because for years when I was doing past life regression work and helping people quit smoking or overcoming stage fright or whatever it was, I learned to do a technique that we just called it the parts party.
Okay.
And the basic idea was that we all have these parts within ourselves that are responsible for different aspects of our lives. And from moment to moment, from task to task, we can see ourselves or feel ourselves putting on a different hat.
Yes.
And in regression work, these parts, when a person would get relaxed, these parts could literally manifest in their consciousness as people, as objects, and even as things. And in the course of a session, you could literally interact with those parts and find out why they were holding a person back in a certain way or why they weren't allowing them to move forward. So are we talking about the same kind of parts where we're literally talking about aspects of our consciousness that are responsible for different aspects of our lives, and by connecting with those parts, we can improve ourselves?
Yes, I think so. Let me just clarify a bit. I'm also a licensed psychotherapist,
mm-hmm.
and, some of these parts are disenfranchised parts from this lifetime. Some of our inner children or the parts we've developed as a result of different roles we've played in this lifetime. But what Bob was discovering was that some of these parts or aspects are really from whole life stream personalities in the form of other lifetimes that might be holding us back.
Yeah, when I trained to do that, I had, just to talk about it briefly, I remember several of my parts. I had a female starship captain who
mm-hmm.
kind of burst into the meeting saying, look, I think this is all kind of funny. This is very peculiar. I don't really have time for it, but let's get this over with. Then I had a librarian from like ancient Alexandria, and the part I was working on was which we called the problem part, was prosperity. And this
mm-hmm.
guy was like totally like a street person, the part of me that was responsible for my financial well-being.
Right.
Well, through the session, what we did is we took another neutral part of mine, happened to be this ball of brilliant white light. And so we took the street person, put him in the light, and out pops this Jewish banker named Cecil, who had all this gold around him. And I just
mm-hmm.
am watching this unfold within me like a movie, and I got the clear impression these are like either past lives, future selves, or other aspects of myself that I didn't even know were there.
Right. Right. Well, in the Monroe Institute system, we would say, we all have these. And so we do have a program timeline which allows people to specifically focus on becoming aware of other lifetimes. And in our Lifeline program, there's a tremendous amount of retrieval of other aspects of self. But gradually, in the late 80s, Bob found himself in a new energy which he realized consisted of literally thousands of these life streams and personalities.
Wow.
That he began to refer to as his I there.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized that his I there had personalities that had never been human, physical, before, some that existed in other energy systems that were non-physical, that were non-human, that had forms totally different than human. But all of these were part of a totality which he came to know as his I there as opposed to I here, being this body personality. And this was an important thing for Bob, because he would often say, once you make contact with your I there, it's impossible to ever be lonely again. Because you realize that every little drop of experience that you're having, that you've ever had in this lifetime, every thought, all of it is savored and treasured by the whole, by the totality. It's contributing to the development of the whole. And that you're constantly receiving assistance from this whole I there as well.
That's an incredible concept, because that gives us a lot of extra motivation for making positive changes in our lives, because it affects everyone and everything that we come into contact then.
Yes. And so even the last week of Bob's life, I happened to be up there at the Institute the week that he passed over, which was March of 1995. But even that last week, he was going through his first book, Journeys Out of the Body, and trying to make a list of every place where he received assistance and hadn't even thought to ask where it was coming from, because he began to realize that it was coming from mostly his I there and some very distinct aspects of his I there. He found that there was a group of, I'm going to say 6 or 7 key personalities who represent like other lifetimes, who were part of his I there, who became, in his later years, his executive committee.
Interesting.
You know, he felt like he could just sit down with them and get all kinds of valuable advice and assistance and understanding.
Yeah, this is like the kind of the fantasy of who would you have dinner with if you could? Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, John F. Kennedy, the Buddha type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he also realized that it wasn't just linear, you know, past or future lifetimes, but there were other aspects of his I there expressing in present time in other parts of the world. He was very interested in the life of a woman in Russia who was part of his I there, who had some similar kinds of responsibilities.
So it was after his passing and his transition in 1995 that you then kind of took over as sort of the developer of new programs. You developed something called Starlines. Tell us about this program.
Okay, well, let me just first correct that and say I would not say I took over as the developer.
Uh-huh.
I did develop a program right after Bob's passing, Exploration 27.
Mm-hmm.
It was one that I had talked with him about before his passing, but then he left, so it fell to me to do.
Uh-huh.
And other trainers have also developed new programs since Bob's passing. But the Starlines program is one that we started in 2003. We had been doing the Exploration 27 program since 95, and in that program we visit a state we call Focus 3435, which Bob referred to in his second book as the Gathering.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a huge portal state also,
wow.
But it's a state where it's very easy to have contact with many different kinds of intelligences, non-physical intelligences.
For the purpose of?
For the purpose of, I would say, first of all, just getting to know them. Okay?
Yeah, just informational purposes.
Information exchange, experience exchange.
Right.
But also continuing on with this idea of gathering the parts of the I there, that's also a key part of it.
So this is
Bob,
this is just gathering around instead of a well in a community, you're gathering around kind of a wormhole or a stargate, aren't you?
Yes, you could see it like that, very much so. When Bob initially came across the Gathering, he was under the impression that these intelligences were gathered mostly to be watching and observing what was happening on Earth. Because from their perspective, there were several streams of converging energies that would be affecting Earth, and everyone was interested in seeing what was going to happen, like Earth was the big show.
See.
Okay?
Like an experiment of some kind.
Possibly. But in any event, whatever was going to happen on Earth was going to be affecting everyone else also.
Mm-hmm.
So they were gathered, and some of these, it's like having a news team from your local news station go out and cover an event, you know. They're just observing. Others seem to have an interest in helping. But in any event, at this state, there were a lot of other intelligences gathered. What we discovered after we started moving into that state is that the term, the gathering, applies to us as well, because it is a place for us to continue to gather aspects of self, and is probably the state in which we would find the totality of what Bob calls the I there. Okay? But Bob also found that his I there was bonded to many other I theres, forming a huge I there cluster. Okay?
Fascinating.
And his I there cluster was bonded to many, many, many other I there clusters, forming what ultimately seemed to be an infinite sea of bonded I there clusters.
Wow. So it's like an infinite sea of souls in a way then.
Yes, connected.
Wow.
Okay? And then in later years, Bob was interested, he would observe that every now and then a big chunk, he talked about how this sea of I there clusters formed in what the best he could describe it was like an infinite honeycomb kind of pattern. And every now and then big chunks would disappear. Okay?
Would disappear?
Disappear.
Wow.
So he would wonder where they were going. And then one day he had an experience where he was just determined to find out where they were going, and he, even after being discouraged or dissuaded by various intelligences, he pushed on, and he found himself eventually moving through an aperture into a different energy flow, which he talked about as the flow to the great emitter.
Wow.
Okay? Now, Bob normally did not use words like God, although he would occasionally say creator, okay? But the great emitter was some kind of energy, distant energy emitter from whence all of this creation had come. But he found himself in the flow to the great emitter going back, but he was stopped.
Is the great emitter the galactic center? I mean, that's thought of in shamanic traditions as the emitter of souls. Are we talking about the center of the Milky Way galaxy?
I think we're talking about a point actually beyond that. I think that the Milky Way, the galactic core, corresponds more to the aperture through which he moved.
I see. That makes sense.
Okay. But when Bob was in this flow, he was suddenly stopped and was told that he couldn't go any further. And he said, well, why not? And this voice said to him, well, what gift you bring, little one? Okay. And he didn't know what that meant. And he was told that he had to go back and gather his parts.
Wow.
Okay. So that was a greater impetus for Bob to focus on this idea of gathering parts or becoming aware, acknowledging, recognizing, integrating, allowing, loving, healing, all of these vast parts, these aspects of self spread throughout time and space, and spread throughout other dimensions and even other energy systems, other planets, other aspects of creation.
Wow. Francine, we've just got a couple minutes left, and
okay.
I promised in the beginning we talked just a little bit about how my presentation, Stargate 2012, is factoring into your new program at the Monroe Institute, Starlines 2. Can you tell us just briefly about that?
Okay. Well, I actually used two of your presentations in that program. We did our first one last week. Mm-hmm. I used the Stargate 2012 and also the first CD from your Light Body series.
Oh, the Light Body Effect.
Yeah, and which was a huge hit.
Oh, great.
Okay. The Starlines 1 program includes, I consider it basic training for galactic ambassadors. It includes a lot of update on the field of astronomy and journeying throughout the known universe, the hundreds of billions of galaxies, and the many dimensions that this includes. Well, Starlines 2 is more about taking some of this energy that we're all recognizing as flowing into our galaxy and into our Earth life system, and being able to better integrate it, to ground it, to use it for whatever transformation is occurring here.
Well, I have a sense that Whitley's going to want to talk with you in more detail about this in your subscriber interview, which will follow this program. And Franceen, I wish we had more time, but we're out of time for today. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Well, William, I've enjoyed talking with you, and thank you so much for this opportunity to just bring people a little bit up to date on what's going on at the Monroe Institute.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it and wish you all the best.
Next week, subscribers chat live with Franceen King on Dreamland. Timothy Good is back.
Turning inside a hazy gaseous surface that kept changing colors. Well, another of Courtney's Granville friends and eyewitness to these strange flashing lights in Massachusetts is Richard Guzman, 39 years old, with a background as a computer salesman, and now he is a detail mechanic for van servicing in Granville. His house is about 5 minutes up the road from Dan Vierno's and is more isolated in the Granville Mountains. An odd, colorful, flashing light first caught his attention from his bedroom window on April 15th, and Rich could not figure out what that light was that night and was even more surprised when his friend Dan Vierno called him on Thursday night, April 17th, and told Rich to go outside to see at least 5 bright flashing lights.
The 17th, I had a phone call from my friend Dan, and Dan said, Rich, you got to look up the sky. I think there's something up there, and I don't know what it is, but I think there are definitely UFOs up there. I'm like, UFO? What are you talking about? So I'm looking up to the sky, and I'm looking, and I'm seeing these flashing lights, and I grab my binoculars, and I look up, and he's on the phone with me at the same time, you know? He's like, what do you see? And I'm like, there's like these flashing silver lights, and they go from silver, and then they went to red, and then they went to blue.
How many do you think were in the sky at the same time doing these odd color flashes?
For me, what I witnessed, I'm going to say at least over 5.
And were they in any kind of a pattern themselves in relationship to each other?
I saw one of them that looked kind of like a long triangle. Like there was like one that was pointed west, one was pointed north, and one was pointed south. It was weird because the triangle was long, not facing downward, but sideways. 3
of these pulsing lights forming themselves into a formation of a long triangle.
Yeah, exactly. The one that I saw really vivid, it was moving and doing this little jagged movement, like moving a little bit and then staying in the spot, moving a little bit and then staying in the same spot. I don't know, I never seen anything like it in my life.
If you've got one long triangle formation of 3 of them, what were the other pulsing lights? What kind of pattern were they in?
In the triangle formation, they didn't really move. There was one that I saw separate that was like bigger and vibrant. That's the one I saw just move a little bit and then stay still and then move a little bit and then stay still. And then I could see like silver, like it was just like a silver whitish color. You know, that's weird, hard to describe it. But I do recall when Dan was talking.
Side circling around, and then there was a second object over to the right of that first object, the one that I was videotaping. And that one was mainly orange with the same colored lights dancing in the middle.
So one was more silvery white and one was orange, but both had that merry-go-round look of colored lights swirling around inside.
Yes, you could clearly see colored lights swirling around it. It was like blue and green and red and pink and gold. It reminded me of those flashing lights that they sell at Disney World for the parade.
Really vivid colors.
Yes, yes. It was beautiful. It was like a bright pink and green and blue and gold. And it was just hovering above tree line. And it looked like it was maybe sort of slowly moving downward, just ever so slightly.
Okay, and for 90 minutes, from your point of view as an eyewitness and a photographer, this silvery white light with the colored lights moving around inside of it like a merry-go-round, and the orange-amber light with colored lights moving around inside of it. Were they really unique compared to other astronomical things you've ever seen?
Yeah, it was completely different than the stars because we were comparing the stars. We were looking through the binoculars, and we were looking at the stars, and then we'd go back to the object. The object was a lot brighter, a lot bigger, and it had the colors, swirling carousel of colors on the inside. So it was just this big, colorful ball of light hovering above the tree. And the first object was moving down, and the other one, the amber-colored one, wasn't moving at all. It was just staying there. In comparison to some of the star formations above, we could see them, just since we were out there for so long, tilt downward towards the horizon. But the other object, it wouldn't move with the constellations. It just stayed there.
I told Courtney that Erath County Constable Leroy Gayton in Dublin, Texas, described one unidentified aerial object that he saw and videotaped on February 2nd, 2008. This was his description, quote, "A spinning sun or Jupiter planet like gaseous throwing off colored strobe lights," unquote. Other Texas eyewitnesses said that it was like looking at a merry-go-round covered with silver-white Christmas tree lights.
Today on Dreamland, we have an extraordinary guest, Franceen King. Franceen is one of the premier facilitators at the Monroe Institute. She's been at it for 20 years, and the first gateway at the Monroe Institute she ever facilitated, guess who one of her students was? It was me, Whitley Strieber. I had an incredible time there, and you're going to hear all about it when Franceen and I talk about this gateway and about these experiences in the subscriber section. I had these after the communion experience and before I had published the book, and I gave a galley of the book to Robert Monroe, and he read it and said, "You're going to have trouble with this." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Little did I know. But first, Linda Moulton Howe is going to be with us with a hot report on very unusual lights in the sky around the country. The possible hoax in Phoenix is just the tip of the iceberg. And at the end of this remarkable presentation, you're going to find out that probably wasn't a hoax at all. So here she is from Albuquerque, earthfiles.com, award-winning master of ceremonies, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Well, I'm going to start with April 18th and the 4:37 a.m. Central Time, when there was a huge earthquake at an epicenter 38 miles northwest of Evansville, Indiana. It was a magnitude 5.2 at about 7 miles deep, and it shook sleeping residents in Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Kansas, and as far as Georgia, nearly 900 miles away. Indianapolis International Airport closed down for an hour while the control tower was evacuated. This was the first strong earthquake in the Midwest since 1968, 40 years ago. Well, northeast of that epicenter in Kokomo, Indiana, 2 days, or actually nights, before the earthquake on April 16th, the 9/11 Emergency Center was flooded with almost 150 phone call reports between 10:25 and 10:40 p.m. The calls were about bright lights in the sky and a loud explosion or boom that violently rattled houses and windows. Authorities were quick to, the next day, come up with it was, quote, a mid-air mistake Wednesday night when at least 2 F-16 jets in routine training exercises with the Indiana Air National Guard went too fast at 10,000 feet and caused a sonic boom on the ground, unquote. But the Mutual UFO Network received a series of alleged UFO sightings on that night of April 16th from Kokomo residents specifically. And here is one example. Quote, at approximately 10:30 p.m. on the night of April 16, I was in the living room watching TV and my husband had gone to bed. There was a huge boom that rattled the front window. My husband asked, what is that noise? And I went to the front door to see. Off to the west, there appeared a large object with lights all the way across it. It reminded me of a hair barrette with lights. It seemed to be hovering, yet the lights appeared to turn around it. My husband came out to stand behind me just in time to see the lights reappear from right to left until 5 lights were showing. Then this did this for a second time before it disappeared. The lights that we saw with our naked eye were yellowish orange in color. If you click on wwki.com, there is an article about this boom and the bright lights. You will see pictures that someone submitted. The 4th picture down is exactly what I saw when I first looked outside, unquote. And in my Earth Files report about this news, you can see that photograph and others taken in Kokomo that night of April 16th that look like colored beads in a complex pattern very similar to Stephenville, Texas in January. Now, continuing a bit more with her email to MUFON, quote, "This was no meteor or F-16. They don't hover. We could not take our eyes off of this, and my husband, who is a Vietnam veteran and a retired deputy sheriff, said he had never seen anything like it. We are both certain that what we saw was unidentifiable," unquote. Well, the next day, WWKI Radio in Kokomo, Indiana, posted the following images on its website under the headline, quote, "Big boom, lights in the sky," unquote, and below the headline, it put 5 photographs courtesy of Dustin Cronkite taken between 10 and 11 p.m. on April 16, 2008. The radio website asked listeners to, quote, "Take a look at these pictures. After you do, take the poll and let us know what you think they are," unquote. At Earth Files, I have cropped the photos of multiple colored, shape-changing aerial objects, highly strange, very much like Texas, to give the largest images without too much pixel distortion. The intensity of the colorful patterns are not as bright as the Texas video and photos, but you can see a comparison of all of these photos and videotapes that I'm discussing in this Dreamland report at my news website, earthfiles.com, in the report entitled Strange Aerial Lights Like Texas, but now photographed in Indiana, Illinois, and Massachusetts. Well, that big booming noise and earthquake hit 2 days later in the early morning of Friday, April 18th. And that afternoon, I received an email from a professional photographer in Massachusetts. Courtney Lynn Wilson Merrill lives in Holyoke. She and her husband have been good friends and have good friends in Granville, about 20 minutes southwest. Courtney was alerting me to the fact that her Granville friends were seeing very strange and colorful lights flashing in the sky that week. And then, the very night that she had emailed in the afternoon on Friday night, April 18th, around 10 p.m., Courtney got a call from Dan Vierno in Granville who said there were 2 more bright lights with spinning colors above trees near his house.
Immediately, I grabbed my camera, I grabbed my tripod, I grabbed my husband, and I was out the door, and I drove right over there. I jumped out of the car. My husband was actually trying to park, and Dan just immediately grabbed me by my shoulders, handed me binoculars, and pointed into the sky. And there was this big, bright ball of white light just above the tree line, and it was flashing with colors. And when you looked at it through your binoculars, the object looked circular, and it had the lights inside of it moving. It was mainly a bright white light with the colors on the inside.